Okay, so welcome back. Let's get started with part 2. This is the part on, we talked about cc&rs in part 1. This is where we get into HOAs, Homeowners Associations. And as I said before, you don't want to miss this, because this one will really shock you with what happened to Juanita and what she's going to tell us. So those of you that are new, hit the subscribe button, hit the click, and ring the bell, and then let's go. Here we go. Closely here, because there's the second part of this now, right?
Yes.
And that would be what?
So the part 2, so the part 1 was know your cc&rs and understand them. Part 2 is know the community's financial health. So, and I had shared with you off camera, but
now we're going to share on camera.
Now we're going to share on camera. So
listen close.
Yes. So I bought a home, back in 2003 here in the harbor, and I read through the cc&rs. I was certain that I could live with the guidelines therein. But what I didn't do is I didn't look at all at what the community owned as far as common property and its financial health. And so I moved in April, and in July, our water system failed. So I heard some alarms, and people said, hey, that means the well's going dry. It's July. I went into my house, turned on the kitchen sink, and nothing came out. So that was shocking. I was single, and just didn't even know where I was going to go at that moment. I had assumed when I bought the house that
is that word assume?
You assume, right? I assumed that that the well was in good shape. I assumed that we had plenty of money to make repairs. I made a lot of assumptions, and the reality was the well was 50 years old. They had been putting aside money for many years. We had about $250,000 in a reserve fund for the well. But the stark reality was we needed to dig a new reservoir, get all new pumps, and the pipes to our homes needed to be completely replaced. So not just the piece that was on my property, but all of the infrastructure that was out in the common roads. And so the price tag for all of that was about $2 million. And we were out of time. We had to do this. And there are 88 homeowners. So if you quickly do the math, it's upwards of $20,000 that we all needed to come up with quickly in order to have water. And obviously without water, we could have been red tagged and then would have been paying a mortgage for something we couldn't use. So
in the heat of July.
In the heat of July, yes. So that was my experience. It was an eye-opener. And so that was 2003. In 2011, the state of Washington put a law on the books in the RCWs dealing with HOAs that requires homeowners associations to do a better job at disclosing what are the common components that the homeowners own collectively, and what is the likelihood that they're going to fail, and when will they fail, and what is it going to cost to replace them when they fail? So, and that's called a reserve study.
Okay.
So,
is there a number that they use for so many years for wear and tear on the road or water? Or
yes.
You're going to get into that, or
yes,
did I get you off track?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
So the law says that HOAs are required to do a study annually. Interestingly, the law doesn't require you to put any money away. So that's why I always say this is a disclosure law. So it is for people like me who bought their house and didn't understand exactly what the situation was as far as the financial health of the community. So this law says that, again, they need to list in the study all the commonly owned components and a life expectancy. So there's literally a table in the study, and the study has to be done by an objective third party. So there are numerous companies out there that do reserve studies. They all do them about the same. So they measure out how much, if you own your own roads, how much asphalt do you have? What is the going rate to replace it? What kind of shape is your asphalt in? Has it been sealed? Does it, that was the other thing. In addition to my well, our roads were really potholed. And I just, again, assumed that someone was going to pave those and take care of them, and it wasn't happening. And so when we finally, we had to go through a lot of assessments to fix the well, and once we did that, we also paved our roads, and that was not inexpensive because they were so badly worn at that point. They couldn't be sealed or coated. They had to be completely destroyed, so we had to grind up the roads and then repave them, and we didn't have enough structure underneath the roadbed, so there wasn't enough base, so we had to bring in base and do all of that. So it was a very expensive venture, but I'm delighted that we did, even though it's been expensive, and I pay a lot more every month than I would like to pay in my assessment. The roads look good. We're not having a hard time selling homes in our neighborhood because the financial health is good.
That might have even brought some people probably had to look at, can I even afford to pitch in for this, or do I need to sell the house? I mean, that would be a heartache, so that might be nice. And that was called again, what, reserve?
A reserve study.
What if, I want to go find, I'm looking at this thing, or my client says, hey, I want to find out more about this, and do they have a reserve study? Or if they get on a board now and they have to do this reserve study, what do? Do you just Google reserve study?
Yes, you do.
How do you find reputable? Sure. Angie's List, or what's that mean?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you wouldn't probably find it on Angie's List, but there are some great reserve study specialists in our area, and their product is all about the same. It's good quality, and they're pretty standard. So what you're going to find in a study is you're going to find a table of all the common components, and it'll tell you what the total lifespan is. So it'll tell you that, a road's lifespan might be 30 years as long as it is properly maintained. Mm-hmm. Meaning that it's been sealed every 6 to 8 years or something like that. So it'll tell you what the expected lifespan is, but it will also tell you how much life is left. Okay. So maybe a lifespan is 30 years, but if this road wasn't, like ours, was not built properly in the first place, we may not get that 30 years out of it. And there's a lot of things that communities own that you wouldn't think about. So the entrance sign, if there's a monument that announces the name of your community when you drive in, gates. If it's a gated community, that's a very costly component. Okay. Obviously, private roads and sidewalks, things of that nature. The mailboxes, that's something that people forget often, is the mail receptacles are often, if it's a bank of boxes, they're often community owned. A storm pond, these days the county, if you have private roads, they want you to manage your stormwater runoff, so most associations have storm ponds, catch basins, and stormwater management systems, some of them very sophisticated with their, like an in-ground processing plant. So there are filters and pieces to those that have to be replaced. So the reserve study specialist comes in, they should be familiar with all the components. They'll put the expected lifespan on there as well as their current status of use. And then they'll tell you how much it's going to cost to replace it. And then they give you a table by year. So the state of Washington says, and this be it as it may, it's a rule, you may or may not agree with it, but the state of Washington says homeowners should know how much money is going to be needed for the next 30 years. So a reserve study specialist report is going to give you a table that says, starting with the year they do the study, and then every year there will be a line in the table that says how much money you're going to need to have in the bank. And so if they expect something to fail in 5 years, on that line item, you're going to see the cost associated with that.
What does this study run? I mean, the Homeowners Association says got to pay for this. Right. And probably some of them squawk about paying, but yet in the long run, they don't want to end up with a situation like you had with yours. So what does something like that cost?
Sure. So our association now does this study every year. The law says it should be done annually, and what the law goes on to say that every 3 years it should be a visual inspection. So you want your certified specialist to come out, walk through the property, measure everything off, make sure you haven't added any community property, purchased anything new, new playground equipment or anything that should be valued. So they'll do a visual inspection 3 times a year, and then in the other years they'll do a cost of inflation adjustment. The cost of the study is usually right around, it depends on the size of the community and the type of the community. So a condominium where your common own elements are far greater than an HOA, it's going to be a more expensive study. But I would tell people to plan on, if you're an HOA, plan on maybe $1,800 a year for a study. The law does say if you have 10 homes or fewer, you aren't required to do it. Or if doing a study causes a significant financial hardship for an HOA. But if there's any HOA that can't afford to at least do the study once, if that's a financial hardship, then I would take a good long look at that HOA before I bought there.
Yeah.
And again, so you as an agent, you can really help, because you can help that buyer ask the seller
the right questions.
A copy of the study. Yes.
Yes. And there's probably going to be somebody who's going to look at you and go, "What study?" You know,
right.
And who would you get that study from? I mean, now a lot of times we'll go, you know, prior to showing a house, you might call up the title and escrow company and say, "I need a copy of the cc&rs," and that's where maybe the agent has gotten it for the, you know, listing. Yeah. But where else, and where do you find this? I mean, you have to get probably the president of the organization or something.
Yeah, so you would probably go to the seller, and then the seller would need to ask the association. If they have a management company like us, they would come to us and we would direct them to the study. A lot of times HOAs have a website where they post it online and you can go get it. But you know, either the association board or the association management company should be able to provide it. And the last piece of that study is to know that not only does it tell you how much money you're supposed to have, or you know what you need, it'll also tell you what percent funding you have. So in other words, the study there'll be an executive summary page that you can kind of go to the bottom line, and because again, just like your cc&rs, very lengthy document, your reserve study is also a very lengthy document, and some of us have a very short attention span, and so if you don't want to read all 30 pages or whatever of the report, look for the executive summary, which will tell you, you're looking for the wording percent funded. And so, you know, a healthy HOA is going to have, at a minimum, what I would call just-in-time funding, at a minimum. Okay. The state says you should have everything you're going to need over the next 30 years in the bank now. That's the state's expectation. So that's what fully funded means. If you see an HOA where the executive study or the executive summary on the reserve study says fully funded, that's a miracle, and you should buy a house there, because that means they got every penny they need over the next 30 years in the bank. I think of the 130 communities we work with, we maybe have 3 that are fully funded. So if they're not fully funded, does that mean they're a disaster? No, it doesn't. But do they have just-in-time funding, or are they minimally funded? So
just-in-time funded is
just-in-time funding is that you would look, you would ask them for their financials, and you'd see, okay, over the next 5 years, they're going to need $100,000. Probably. There's $100,000 worth of repairs in the study. So if they have $100,000 in the bank, or on track to have at least what you see coming in the short term, then maybe they'll be okay. They'll have enough funding when they need it. So they won't have everything for the next 30 years. Most of us don't have, I mean, if you think about it, I don't think I have all of my living expenses for the next 30 years in the bank.
How come?
I don't know. That's bad planning. But that is what the state is telling these HOAs. So we have to remember that. And again, that's their recommendation, and that's great. But reality is you won't find a lot of associations in that position. But you want to make sure there's a plan in place to have what you're going to need when the system fails. So in my experience, in my community, we did not have, we were $1,750,000 short, and we had to come up with that money, and thankfully we were able to get a loan for the community, but now we'll be paying that back for 30 years. So they're going to get you one way or another.
Yeah. Anything else that was on your notes here that we had? I had maybe one other question, but it might be a different subject then.
Sure. I think we talked about this. I suppose if you find that an HOA hasn't done a reserve study, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a great community to buy in, but I would sure ask the question of why they haven't done a study. If they don't use a management company, they might not know it's a requirement. So, you know, I would encourage them to have one before you walked away from a deal, because it might be that the HOA would benefit from doing that.
Okay. A quick thank you to Juanita, but don't go away, because you want to click on just part 3 here, get one more good question. And what about when you have an HOA and you want to have a rental property in there and owning that? How does that affect the community, and what are your rules that you have to abide by?